agribusiness. Brought to you by Bank of New Zealand. Committed to agri for more than 160 years. With over 100 agribusiness partners across the country, BNZ is local and ready to support your business through the seasons.
Well, joining us here at Out the Gate conference, the Beef and Lamb conference, is, of course, Simon Quilty, from Global Agritrends. And thank you for being a columnist in a lot of our publications, Simon. And I've enjoyed our time, as did the audience, around the positivity that you brought to the table. We're going to cover a whole bunch. Andy and I both like geopolitics. So I suppose let's start with
the elephant in the room, shall we?
The elephant in the room.
No, I didn't mean to call him that, but Simon, we all know since the 28th of February, the world's kind of tipped a little bit upside down. We've seen in a few years before that a thing called COVID, but this is a different type of disruption. What do you make of that disruption on the New Zealand ag sector? Should we be concerned about it?
So we're referring to Donald Trump, Andy?
The elephant, did you say?
Yeah, the elephant in the room.
It's an interesting way to describe it, but I like it. So when he first came into power January last year, he actually introduced all those tariffs. And at the time, beef, I think, had near on 10 to 15%. We know lamb today still is at 10%. But in actual fact, that actually pushed prices higher because the consumer had to pay for it. And in actual fact, it lifted global market as well. So the initial impact of our friend Donald Trump was actually very positive for both New Zealand and Australian exporters. In his wisdom, and it took him all of a year to work it out, that in actual fact, he had to lower tariffs and to make it more affordable for the consumer, which he's done on beef, as you know. But on lamb, it still remains at 10%. And there is talk that they're trying to lift that higher under a review. So the clear message, Andy, is that Trump now has seen the light. He's lowered tariffs. What he was going to do last week was he was going to reduce all tariffs, which includes Brazil, which today sits at 26.4%. Brazil has a quota. They share it with 4 other countries, 65,000 tonnes, and they filled that within 3 weeks of this year. Such is the volume out of Brazil. They are then up against a 26.4% duty, and the concern was that if you lower that to 0, it would flood the American market with Brazilian lean beef, and therefore...
Simon, the other quota is into China around flooding our markets. We recently saw the elephant in the room, Mr. Trump, with Xi Jinping. They seem to be getting along.
Yes, that was the summit, and that was last week as well. It's a busy week. And so as a result of that visit, America, that had been banned from putting into China for a year, since April last year, those bans were reinstated, as in the export licenses were given back, and they could now start to export into China. On the surface, that might be seen to be a negative for New Zealand beef. But in actual fact, Australia and Brazil are about to hit their safeguard, and they will face a 55% and 67% duty, and shipments will stop into China from those 2 countries. New Zealand effectively has the market to themselves almost, in relative speaking. But what's also important is that when these tariffs or safeguards are hit, the concern is displacement. As in, if Brazil can't send it there, or Australia, they then put it in to these other markets. And if I may use a little bit of French, that you're worried that they're going to shit in your own backyard, all right? So the concern is Japan and Korea get overloaded because of diversified product into there. In reality, though, America's exports into those markets are down dramatically this year, 20% and 8%. 20% into Japan, 8% into Korea. Plus, the domestic supply is down in those as well. So they're down near on 4 to 6% in slaughtering. There is not enough meat in the world to meet everyone's needs. So therefore, I expect the displacement to have zero impact on pricing for New Zealand meat.
I'll just ask you to stand in front of the mic a little bit more, Simon,
Sure.
so we can hear you. Hey, that's a really good news story. No wonder these farmers came bouncing out of the conference.
Absolutely. And so what we're talking about is at the moment historically high protein prices, meat prices, sheep and meat and beef
Correct.
from New Zealand. Those prices are going to stay. What's your take on, or are we going to see a growth in prices?
You're going to see that move higher again.
Percentage-wise?
Let me give you that, Andy, but let me explain to you while I'm pulling those out, is that you've got in terms of lamb for New Zealand, today the market's at $11.50, thereabouts. I'm calling it to go to $12.50 in August this year.
Well, on the front page of Farmers Weekly, there's an AFCO contract out for $12.40.
All right, we're almost there.
Yeah.
So record levels. And in beef, it's a similar story, Andy. So why it will go higher is that we have got here today in these really good prices based on strong demand. The next step will be the lack of supply as Australia, as America, and as Brazil all go into rebuild. And supply tightens, heifers are retained, we go into rebuild the flock and the herd, and the prices take another leg up. Demand remains strong and steady, but its lack of supply lifts prices to the next level.
Interesting, Simon. I'm just trying to recall, was it 12 months or 2 years ago, you were talking about that rebuild, meaning lamb prices in New Zealand could tank off the back of an Australian rebuild. Is that still the case?
No. So what we've learned since then is that, one, the rebuild has been delayed due to dry conditions across Australia that continued, but also that the flock will never go back to where it was. We've had a huge exodus, mainly merino sheep producers, who will no longer be in the game. So I think if we went from 74 million sheep, today it sits closer to 62. If we're lucky, we go 67, if we're lucky. So a structural change.
Simon, I was talking to Alan Thompson earlier this month, and we were discussing a whole lot of things. But he said one thing that really, really surprised me, and I noticed in my wonderful notes that Izzy prepared for us, you were talking about the same thing. The OPEC, the weight loss drugs, and the way that is impacting the protein use in America. The stat of 46 million people are using them currently in the States, going to go to 92 million people,
Correct.
a quarter of the population. On the face of it, that would think, okay, they're going to stop eating, but they're not. They're going to change the way they're eating. How does this work?
Well, first of all, it's not a cheap drug. So roughly costs you at retail 1,700 New Zealand dollars a month for your course. So over a year, that's $20,000. So these are high-end users of the drug in terms of having money in their pocket. So, Andy, they are doing this because it's getting effect. And that once you're on the drug, you keep on the drug. So the stomach contracts, they don't want to eat as much, but the proportion of protein on the plate increases overall compared to the carbohydrates and everything else. So what we're finding is strong demand, particularly for beef, but also strong demand for quality beef. And I put organic, never ever, and all those other niche parts of the business that New Zealand does so well is very much a part of this uptake in protein.
Yeah, it was a big part of the deer industry conference around venison being a high quality, low lean protein, as well as, of course, lamb being on the menu. Interestingly, the rebuild in America will probably never be the same, yet they seem to have such a sway for 3 million ewes.
Yeah, no, it's So the rebuild, we think, starts this year and is 3 years, if not longer, in the process. So the beauty is that I think New Zealand's rebuild, which you are on the verge of in your cattle, in your sheep, you continue to liquidate, but in cattle, you will turn it around quickly. And as a result, you will get all the benefits of lack of supply out of Australia, out of Brazil, and out of America. And the expression I use, Sarah, is that you will be backfilling the backfiller. Meaning Australia's been backfilling all these years on America, and we too run out, and New Zealand steps up and enjoys that moment.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking, B1?
Oh,
This dry period
yeah.
and what potentially the
El Niño.
El Niño could do for New Zealand, dumping not only lambs but capital stock.
Sure. So on that super El Niño, our weather experts are saying, because Australia is just as much in the firing line as you are, and what you don't want is Australia dumping as well, getting double effect. But Art Douglas, who is 50 years weather professor of weather in America, he says this is the most unusual El Niño he's ever seen. It bypasses Australia, New Zealand, and it is in Indonesia, Malaysia, and India. He is calling it wet in Australia for 3 months. So we're talking May, June, July, and be neutral for August, September, October, and then to be wet again November, December, January. So you talk about the super El Niño, but Sarah, dare I say, this one will be different.
So that's really interesting because there's a lot of preparation with, we're hearing a lot about it. So it's going to be a fascinating one to watch. Just on the disruption, talking to you before we came on here, you talked about the disruption in the Middle East, the freight around the world not really impacting on us, or it was a blip.
I don't think, Andy, it's a blip in the sense that if we want to give a perspective of where politically our friend President Trump is heading, I think the midterms in November, there's a very good chance he loses both houses.
Yep.
He gets impeached, or they try to impeach him. He realizes that the Middle East is a folly, and he spends 3 to 4 months trying to unravel himself out of what he's caused in the Middle East. I'm a best case scenario. The Middle East issue disappears April next year, 1 year later.
All right.
And this is a man that spends his life predicting the future. Now, let's give a little plug for those who want to follow along for subscribing to what you do.
Global Agritrends. So just look us up line. We have farmer subscription, $750 a year, 2 updates a week, of which a podcast is one on a Monday morning called Monday Thoughts for the Week, Andy. And the idea is to kick off the week with some interesting thoughts.
Right. Good. That's not a bad
Monday
segment.
Thoughts of the Week.
Yes.
We might have to have a little segment on that. It'll be called What Andy Thompson Was Thinking About on His Kubota Over the Weekend.
Exactly.
Simon, thank you so very much for joining us on CountryWide Connect here at Tapai at the Beef and Lamb New Zealand Out the Gate conference.
Out on the farm, the right support goes a long way. Speak to your local BNZ agribusiness partner for insight and expertise you need to farm through the seasons.